She placed the waterproof plastic-wrapped package containing $64,312,000 in bearer bonds onto the mahogany reception desks at exactly 1:14 p.m. She did not leave her name or linger to wait for the arrogant receptionist to look up from the glaring computer screen. She carefully smoothed the edges of the package so it laid neatly on the marble surface, pivoted on her worn-out sneakers, and walked toward the service corridor. The overthrow had begun. For the past 1,460 grueling nights, the 52-year-old woman named Denise Carter existed merely as an invisible ghost, pushing a janitorial cart along the 42nd floor of the Sterling Vanguard Financial Tower. Her faded denim jacket and ash-gray uniform always reeked of the bitter scent of industrial ammonia, mixed with cheap floor wax. She had spent countless hours scrubbing the $2,400 Italian marble floors and emptying overflowing trash cans filled with paperwork for executives who never once bothered to learn her name. They treated her like trash. The CEO of this empire was Marcus Vance, a man who constantly draped himself in a $14,250 custom-tailored Italian silk suit and considered himself the untouchable architect of the elite. He frequently left condescending notes on his desk, demanding the night shift crew use a toothbrush to scrub every crevice of his keyboard if he accidentally spilled a drop of expensive wine. Marcus steadfastly held on to the toxic belief that the impoverished working class were merely inferior biological machines born to serve his perfection. He was never wrong. It all started on a freezing Tuesday night 4 years ago, when the executive suite's massive Omega 750 industrial paper shredder suddenly jammed due to a thick metal paperclip. While pulling out the transparent trash bags, Denise's sharp eyes accidentally caught her late grandfather's name printed in italics on a yellowed strip of parchment that hadn't been fully shredded. She immediately realized that Marcus Vance and his ruthless lawyers were frantically destroying the final legal evidence of the Carter family's rightful ownership of this bank. A silent war broke out. Instead of confronting the billionaires empty-handed, she began secretly collecting thousands of 0.1-inch paper shreds from the bottom of the machine and hiding them deep within her cart. After finishing her exhausting shift at 6:15 a.m., she had to endure 2 crowded public bus rides, lasting 85 minutes to return to her frigid, dilapidated apartment on Fulton Avenue. She dedicated her rare days off to slumping over the peeling linoleum floor, using a cheap pair of medical tweezers and clear glue to carefully piece back together a stolen segment of history. She was stitching time back together. The process of collecting these historical fragments inside the room housed in the Sterling Vanguard Bank's 750 industrial shredding system was not an easy task for a female janitor constantly monitored by a 36-angle security camera network. Denise had to precisely time the brief 14-second window when camera lens number 08 panned toward the main hallway to slip her hand into the gap beneath the trash tray of the colossal machine weighing over 800 pounds. She had learned to distinguish the colors of various papers, from worthless documents printed on standard Ford paper to top-secret contracts printed on premium silk parchment, solely through light touches through her thin rubber gloves. Everything demanded absolute precision. The megalomaniacal head of security, Richard Hayes, proudly boasted that the bank's document destruction protocol was an impenetrable fortress where every trade secret worth billions of dollars was crushed into paper strips no wider than 0.15 inches. He frequently patrolled the corridors at 2:30 a.m. with the demeanor of a prison warden, shining his tactical flashlight into every nook and cranny and hurling bitter insults if he found even the slightest smudge on the glass. Richard firmly believed that low-wage earners like Denise were simply inferior creatures with shallow intellects who could never comprehend the value of a shredded check. Contempt had blinded him. But Richard had no idea that during her 35-minute break between shifts in the musty basement room, Denise used medical tweezers to sort hundreds of paper shreds she had just stealthily collected. She hid the scraps containing crucial characters related to the name Elias Carter inside the lining of her frayed denim jacket, perfectly camouflaging them under the guise of old thermal insulation cotton. The careless habits of senior managers who constantly mixed personal notes or expensive shopping receipts into the pile of documents slated for destruction inadvertently created a massive web of clues, helping her pinpoint the exact issuance dates of the original bearer bonds. The rich are always arrogant and careless. The search for puzzle pieces belonging to the Carter family's original dark brown leather-bound ledger was as slow and agonizing as finding a needle at the bottom of a deep abyss. There were freezing long nights when the outdoor temperature dropped to a mere 34 degrees Fahrenheit, and Denise had to plunge her bare hands into razor-sharp trash just to retrieve a 2.5-inch wide scrap of paper containing only the tail end of her late grandfather's signature. The 52-year-old woman's patience was forged through dull aching pain as she watched her brother's health rapidly deteriorate at the Oakwood Heritage Medical Center, while her family's legal assets were brazenly stripped away by men like Marcus Vance. Indignation morphed into silent strength. The ventilation system on the 42nd floor constantly blew freezing blasts of air along the hand-woven wool-carpeted walkways, leaving Denise's hands perpetually swollen and cracked with bleeding sores after every shift lasting over 8 hours. Nevertheless, she never allowed herself to shed a single tear or reveal her exhaustion in front of the young financial staff, who frequently stayed for overtime and cast contemptuous glances at her cheap janitorial cart. She silently cleaned up reeking fast food boxes and $12 Italian coffee cups left casually on the floor, calmly overcoming the toxic mockery of her impoverished background to fulfill her destined mission. She had no time for weakness. Every morning as dawn began to break on the city skyline, Denise's olive green canvas bag grew a little heavier with shredded legal evidence waiting to be resurrected from the dead. The massive fortune of $64,312,000 in the form of bearer bonds was not just money. It was the honor, blood, and tears of the Carter family that the hypocrites at Sterling Vanguard had buried for 3 grueling decades. They mistakenly thought that tearing up those old papers and throwing them in the trash would permanently bury the truth, along with the faded existence of a voiceless working-class black family in society. History is never easily erased. This silent war raged on for 1,460 days without a single powerful figure in that magnificent building ever suspecting the devastating force being nurtured right under their noses. Marcus Vance and Richard Hayes continued to sip expensive wines at quarterly profit celebration banquets, entirely convinced that their financial fortress was built on an unshakable foundation of lies that could never be toppled. They had no idea that every shred of paper Denise diligently collected was slowly forming a death sentence for the sheer arrogance and bottomless greed of the elite. Heaven's net is wide and waiting. Apartment 402, located on the 4th floor of a dilapidated red brick tenement on Fulton Avenue, was constantly bathed in the dim light cast by a malfunctioning, incessantly flickering street lamp. This place lacked the hand-woven wool rugs or cozy central heating systems found at the Sterling Vanguard Tower, offering only freezing gusts of wind from the San Francisco Bay sweeping through the cracks in the rotting wooden window frames. Amidst this cramped space reeking of cheap antiseptic and canned food, Denise Carter spent a full 47 grueling months kneeling on peeling linoleum tiles to perform a task that demanded absolute tranquility. She was sewing time back together. Exactly, thousands of .1 inches wood wide were meticulously sorted by their various yellowed color patches and neatly placed into 24 cleanly washed plastic food containers. With a stainless steel medical tweezer bought at a thrift store for $3.50, Denise carefully picked up each historical fragment and applied a drop of clear acrylic glue to the torn edges. The restoration of the Carter family's leather-bound of Leonard and the bearer bonds worth tens of millions of dollars progressed. She managed to successfully piece together merely 2 faded characters. No mistake. The piercing ache from chronic arthritis constantly tormented the 52-year-old woman's swollen finger joints, after exhausting night shifts lasting over 8 hours scrubbing freezing floors. She had to continually soak her rough hands in a basin of warm water mixed with cheap coarse salt for about 15 minutes every morning, so her stiff muscles could soften enough to keep a steady grip on the steel tweezers. The sole motivation keeping Denise from collapsing under this massive workload was the stack of red-printed medical bills, totaling 114,852 toes, for her older brother Terrell, who lay bedridden at the Oakwood Medical Center. She had no right to give up. While Marcus Vance lavishly squandered money on 4 $200 red velvet-wrapped bottles of Chateau de la Croix wine at luxurious nightclubs, the true owner of that fortune was skipping lunch just to buy more glue. He firmly believed that the documents fed into the shredder had completely turned to dust, an arrogant conviction nurtured by the overprotection of a financial system that consistently favored those with aristocratic blood. He had never experienced the helplessness of watching his most beloved family member wither away day by day on a hospital bed simply because he lacked $85 outside his health insurance. Cruelty is a privilege. At exactly 4:15 p.m. on a windy Sunday, the final paper shred, bearing serial number 884AX, belonging to Heist, glued into its place on the cardboard bond, was firmly glued into its place on the cardboard backing. Denise carefully pressed all these fully restored document pages between thick encyclopedias bought from a flea market to ensure the acrylic glue bonded flawlessly and flatly. More than 4,000 fragile strips of paper, once deemed trash, had now merged back into an ultimate legal weapon containing the undeniable signature of her grandfather, Elias Carter, and the red confirmation seal of the federal court. The truth was resurrected. The dark brown leather-bound ledger containing the entire founding history of the Sterling Vanguard Bank now lay silently on the grease-stained plywood kitchen table of one of the neighborhood's most run-down apartments. It was ironclad proof of the heinous crime of stealing the blood and sweat of honest black workers, a crime meticulously covered up under the glamorous facade of investment funds and fake charity galas. Denise gently stroked the rough surface of the ledger, took a deep breath to soothe her lungs tight from the smell of cleaning chemicals, and slowly packed everything into the olive green canvas bag that had accompanied her for 9 years. It was time to collect the debt. The 47X night bus running along Harrison Avenue at 10:14 p.m. always carried the thick, melancholic atmosphere of exhausted laborers. Denise Carter sat quietly in the 5th row from the back door, her calm eyes gazing out the fogged-up window to watch the flickering neon lights of the downtown commercial district. The heavy olive-green canvas bag resting on her lap now contained not only her crumpled janitorial uniform, but also concealed the entire legal documentation dictating the fate of a colossal financial empire. Tonight was the final night. Upon stepping through the rusted steel back door of the Sterling Vanguard Tower at exactly 10:42 p.m., she took a deep breath to take in the familiar scent of disinfectant that had haunted her lungs for the past 9 years. Security Director Richard Hayes stood crossing his arms in front of the surveillance monitor system with an espresso in hand, casting a disdainful glance her way, as if she were a fetid that needed quarantining from his perfect world. He muttered bitter complaints about how her work boots tracked dirt from the Fulton slums, defiling the multi-million-dollar Italian marble floor he had sworn to protect at all costs. He did not know he was about to lose his job. The 42nd floor welcomed the female janitor, with a familiar chaotic mess from the board of directors' quarterly revenue celebration party, where shattered crystal champagne flutes were scattered across that $18,500 hand-woven wool rug. Denise carefully slipped on her frayed yellow rubber gloves, leisurely cleaning up the sharp shards with a strange calmness instead of the resigned humiliation she felt for 3,284 nights prior. She used a microfiber cloth soaked in industrial cleaner to wipe along Marcus Vance's mahogany desk, silently erasing the filthy stains left behind by men who styled themselves as the elite of society. Subservience had ended. The solid gold nameplate engraved with the title Chief Executive Officer sitting prominently in the middle of the desk seemed to mock justice, a justice stolen, and locked away in the dark by the Vance father and son for over 3 decades. She lightly grazed the spine of the original ledger, resting silently at the bottom of her cheap cleaning cart, feeling the absolute power of the truth surging through the veins of a 52-year-old woman. Those men sleeping soundly in their lavish Silicon Valley mansions still naively believed their brutal class segregation system was an impenetrable fortress that could not be breached by a lowly ant. Dawn would burn it all to the ground. At exactly 5:58 a.m., Denise pushed her cart full of industrial waste into the basement storage room, carefully removed her sweat-soaked apron, and hung it on its familiar rusted hook. She strolled over to the cracked porcelain sink in the janitor's designated restroom, washing her weary, wrinkled face with freezing tap water before changing back into her faded denim jacket. Instead of walking out to the bus stop to catch the 12V bus home like every other day, she quietly sat down on a rickety plastic chair in the locker room, closing her eyes to focus all her mental energy for the historical moment about to unfold at opening hours. History was counting down. The image of her 62-year-old brother Terrell breathing faintly through an oxygen machine at the Oakwood Medical Center vividly reemerged in her mind, reminding her of the most sacred reason she had to steadfastly walk this path to the very end. They had not only stolen $64,312,000 in legitimate shares belonging to the Carter family, but also robbed them of the right to decent health care and the right to live with their heads held high as free people, unbound by extreme poverty. Every paper shred she had glued back together with clear acrylic was not just sharp legal evidence, but drops of blood and sweat hardened into a sword thrust, straight into the rotting heart of the sterling Vanguard banking system. Endurance had run dry. The rumbling noise of subway trains running along Montgomery Avenue began echoing through the reinforced concrete foundation, signaling the start of a busy new trading day for men in Italian silk suits. Denise checked the brass zipper of her olive green canvas bag one last time, ensuring the leather-bound ledger and the plastic-wrapped bearer bonds wouldn't get soaked by residual cleaning chemicals. She inhaled a breath of musty basement air, feeling the steady beat of her heart, a heartbeat no longer suffocated by fear of the powerful men who constantly trampled on the dignity of the working poor. She stood up straight. The clock struck exactly 9 a.m., the moment when the bank's multi-million-dollar main lobby would be flooded with sunlight and the elite's money-scented negotiations. The 52-year-old woman slung the canvas bag over her right shoulder, taking resolute strides down the gray concrete hallway leading straight to the front lobby, instead of turning around toward the familiar dilapidated side door. She knew that the moment she crossed that threshold, the greatest storm in this city's financial history would officially erupt, sweeping away all the glittering garbage Marcus Vance had spent decades building. The verdict was ready. The crystal glass revolving door of the Sterling Vanguard Bank's main lobby gently pushed expensive musk-scented air out onto the sunlit Montgomery Avenue at exactly 9:04 a.m. Denise Carter stepped her worn-out sneakers onto the $24,500 hand-woven Tibetan burgundy velvet rug with the proud posture of someone who had nothing left to fear. The appearance of a 52-year-old woman wearing a faded denim jacket and carrying an olive green canvas bag instantly created a jarring scratch in the flawless picture of the upper crust. All eyes froze. The millionaire clients sitting so on the full-grain bullhide leather sofas immediately halted their stock trading negotiations to throw stares of deep contempt her way. A businesswoman draped in a Chanel tweed suit hurriedly pulled her $185,000 Himalayan Hermes handbag away from Denise's reach as if terrified of catching a plague from the slums. Whispers carrying disdain and outrage began spreading across the 200-square-foot lobby space, forming a sharp wave of discrimination aimed directly at the solitary figure walking steadily forward. This place did not welcome her. At the reception desk crafted from a solid block of Carrara white marble, a 28-year-old employee named Vanessa frowned in deep annoyance upon seeing a janitorial worker daring to trespass into the forbidden zone exclusively reserved for the ultra-rich. Vanessa always took pride in her position and believed that maintaining the absolute exclusivity of this space was Kufurk's mission to protect the superiority of society's most elite individuals. She hastily reached to press the internal alarm button under the desk with such force that she broke an elaborately painted fingernail, simultaneously leaving her post to confront and stop this unfolding disgrace in person. Arrogance reigned supreme. "Hey, cleaning lady, the service entrance for janitorial staff is down on basement level 3, and you have absolutely no right to step into the trading floor looking like that." Vanessa's voice was piercing and echoed across the grand lobby like an absolute command, deliberately emphasizing the class divide to humiliate the black woman, standing silently less than 5 feet away. Around them, financial brokers wearing Italian silk suits began smiling in approval of the receptionist's harshness, firmly believing that a ruthless social order must be enforced immediately to preserve the purity of their kingdom. They were the blind ones. Denise showed no signs of panic or anger in the face of that malicious verbal assault. She merely shifted the canvas bag containing $64,312,000 in original bearer bonds to her left shoulder at a leisurely pace. The calm brown eyes of a woman who had endured countless hardships drilled deep into Vanessa's flushed, angry face, a gaze holding the utmost pity for those enslaved by the illusion of power. She took a deep breath to take in the artificial scent of wealth lingering in the air, clearly feeling every steady beat of her heart, knowing that the truth she held was about to burn down all this arrogant delusion. Judgment hour had begun. "I didn't come here to scrub your freezing floors or pick up the expensive coffees you people threw away for another single day." Denise's voice rang out, not overly loud but possessing an astonishing composure, as sharp as a blade slicing through the thick, contemptuous air shared by over 50 people standing in the multi-million-dollar lobby. She took 3 more steps toward the center of the cast brass fountain, completely ignoring the security alarm bells beginning to blare from the side corridors to summon armed guards for suppression. She was standing on her own land. Vanessa's jaw dropped in shock at this blatant disregard for authority from someone she considered bottom-tier scum. The fury of having her honor insulted caused her to lose the professionalism expected of a high-end bank employee. The receptionist pointed a trembling finger at the 52-year-old woman, loudly threatening that this insolence would be paid for with her rotting away in federal prison. The moment Security Director Richard Hayes arrived, prestigious clients started pulling out their cell phones to record this rare spectacle, awaiting a tragic end for a destitute janitor daring enough to challenge the unwritten laws of the powerful ultra-rich. They did not know the storm was coming. The sharp chime from the pure gold-plated glass elevator reserved exclusively for top executives rang out, cutting through the stifling silence of the lobby at exactly 9:07 a.m. CEO Marcus Vance stepped out with the dignified demeanor of a king on a royal tour, draped in a $14,250 custom-tailored Milanese navy blue silk suit along with a Patek Philippe watch glittering under the crystal lights. His cold, pale gray eyes swept over the panicked crowd before stopping on the short stature of the black woman, wearing a denim jacket frayed at the elbows. He frowned in disgust. For a man born with a silver spoon in his mouth, who always considered himself the grand architect of the elite financial order like Marcus, the presence of a female janitor in this area was an unforgivable blasphemy against his family's image-building efforts. He strolled over toward the brass fountain, every step of his alligator leather shoes clicking against the Italian marble floor, producing dry sounds laden with threat and psychological suppression aimed at his opponent. He absolutely believed that sweeping away impoverished scum like Denise from the sight of millionaire investors was his most sacred duty to protect the purity of the sterling Vanguard empire. He was the law. "I paid your cheap cleaning company a fee of $2,480 a week, not so you could bring these reeking rags up here to defile my world-class trading space." Marcus spat out the insult in a deep, warm voice laced with deadly venom, deliberately speaking loud enough so all the VIP clients standing back could hear and admire his absolute authority. He signaled for Vanessa to return to the reception desk to resume her duties, acting as though Denise's appearance was just a bothersome speck of dust that accidentally slipped into the perfect money-making machine he was operating. He would never admit a mistake. If you think causing a scene here will help you squeeze a few extra bucks of severance pay out of my pocket, then you have made the most miserable mistake in your 52 years of languishing on this earth. The insults continued to fly without mercy, trampling on the self-esteem of a hardworking laborer, just to satisfy the massive ego and self-righteous mentality of the powerful CEO. Marcus believed that people from the bottom of society only acted out of petty greed, and public humiliation was the bitter medicine needed to teach them their lowly place in the social food chain. Arrogance had blinded him. Just then, Security Director Richard Hayes and 3 hulking guards in pitch-black uniforms emerged from the side aisles with stun batons already switched on, emitting intimidating crackling sparks. Richard stepped up to stand right behind Marcus with the posture of a loyal hound ready to lunge and tear apart its prey on its master's command, his face clearly showing glee at the prospect of using violence against a vulnerable target. They slowly tightened their circle around the fountain where the woman stood silently, creating a barricade of muscle and weapons to completely isolate her from the rest of the 4,200-square-foot lobby. Violence was about to begin. Drag this crazy woman out and throw her on the Montgomery Avenue sidewalk immediately, and if she dares to resist, feel free to use maximum force without worrying about any legal repercussions. Marcus coldly issued his ruthless command while nonchalantly turning his back to adjust his silk shirt cuffs, completely disregarding the life or safety of a flesh-and-blood human being. He thought that, in less than 30 seconds, this eyesore of an ash-gray ghost would be permanently banished from his kingdom, and everything would instantly return to the dizzying orbit of billion-dollar figures. He had miscalculated. Despite the threatening encirclement of 4 massive men and the blinding electrical sparks crackling right in front of her face, Denise Carter stood as firm as a sedimentary rock that had endured millions of years of ocean wave erosion without chipping away. She did not flinch or beg for mercy from the aggressors. Her hands, covered in faint scars from chemical cleaners, simply moved leisurely to grasp the brass zipper of the olive-green canvas bag. The 52-year-old woman's calm gaze pierced through the security barrier and pinned straight onto the broad back of the CEO, turning away, carrying the power of a truth that had been buried for 30 years. The bag began to open. The dry sound of the rusted brass zipper echoed clearly across the 4,200-square-foot lobby, cutting through the mocking whispers of the crowd of clients standing by to watch the drama unfold. Denise Carter unhurriedly slipped her hands, heavily scarred from industrial cleaners, deep inside the green parachute fabric lining to pull out a stack of documents carefully wrapped in 3 layers of waterproof plastic. Despite the threat from the stun baton sparking less than 25 inches from her face, the 52-year-old woman calmly peeled away the wrapper to reveal a stack of papers bearing the mark of time. The canvas bag was opened. Marcus Vance snapped around, with a deeply annoyed click of his tongue upon realizing his internal security force Stills hadn't taken action to toss this nuisance out onto the Montgomery Avenue curb. He was about to open his mouth to hurl more vicious insults to prove his absolute authority. But those filthy words became permanently lodged in his throat when his eyes hit the glaring red color on the stack of documents. Lying neatly on the female janitor's rough hands was $64,312,000 in original bearer bonds issued in 1974, along with the dark brown leather-bound ledger that had been pieced back together by thousands of streaks of clear acrylic glue. Arrogance began to crack. These are all the permanent voting shares personally signed and stamped for federal court verification by my grandfather, Elias Carter, at exactly 10:14 a.m. on September 12, 1974. Denise's voice rang out quietly but carried a crushing weight that flattened all the noise in the lobby. forcing the millionaire clients to hold their breath and listen to a historical truth being torn out of the shadows. She carefully opened the ledger to the fourth page, angling the tattered, painstakingly restored edge toward the stunned guards so they could see for themselves the red seal and original signature of the true founder. The truth could not be shredded. You used the Omega 750 shredder in the basement to crush our family's legacy into tens of thousands of fragments, convinced that this blatant robbery would forever fade into the past, along with the lowly status of black people. But you never bothered to take out the trash yourselves, never bent down to look at what was scattered across your $24,500 Italian marble floors, and had absolutely no idea that I spent 24/7 grueling months stitching the life of this bank back together on my plywood kitchen floor. Every 0.15-inch wide strip of paper pieced together with cheap glue has now become an irreversible sentence for the ultimate deception the Vance father and son spent 30 years building. The crime was exposed. Security Director Richard Hayes swallowed hard, his muscular hand gripping the stun baton, suddenly dropping limply to his side as his brain began analyzing the severity of the legal documents present right before his eyes. The massive guards who were just threatening to use violence against a vulnerable woman now automatically took 3 steps backward, unconsciously creating a space of reverence around the true owner of the sterling Vanguard financial empire. They realized their blind loyalty had been exploited to protect a hypocritical tyrant, a man who heartlessly stole the blood and sweat of others to build his own throne of illusions. Power was changing hands. The rose gold-plated glass elevator doors in the right corner of the lobby suddenly burst open at exactly 9:12 a.m., cutting through the tense atmosphere with the rapid footsteps of a group of people wearing black suits. Leading the delegation was Senior Chief Counsel Nathaniel Blackwood, a 61-year-old man possessing extensive experience in resolving billion-dollar legal crises for the corporation. He had received the high-resolution barcode-scanned digital copies sent by Denise herself via the internal secure email system at dawn, decrypted using the very personal password Marcus had carelessly jotted down on a yellow sticky note and thrown in the trash. The hour of judgment had struck. Nathaniel hurried through the circle of guards, standing dumbfounded like stone statues, his hands wearing thin silk gloves, carefully accepting the bearer bonds from the woman in the frayed denim jacket. The old lawyer pulled a specialized magnifying glass equipped with an ultraviolet light from his breast pocket, meticulously examining every embedded watermark line and the dark red overlapping seal stamped from 1974. Thousands of transparent acrylic glue streaks running along the 0.15-inch wide paper shreds did nothing to obscure the absolute legality of the identifying serial numbers, testifying to an extraordinary patience far beyond the imagination of any restoration expert. Everything was original. The chief counsel's wrinkled face turned pale in a split second as he folded the magnifying glass, turning to look at the CEO, rooted to the spot with eyes filled with utter bewilderment. He cleared his throat with difficulty before issuing the official declaration that this entire 64,312,000 in shares was fully valid, meaning Ms. Denise Carter now held 51% absolute controlling power over Sterling Vanguard Bank. Marcus Vance immediately snatched the stack of documents with a violent motion, his eyes streaked with fiery red veins as he frantically flipped through the pages of the ledger containing his own biological father's signature. Arrogance was thrashing. It is undoubtedly a sophisticated scam orchestrated by dirty enemies on Wall Street, and I will never hand over my family's great empire to a lowly cleaning lady reeking of ammonia. He roared until his voice cracked across the 200-square-foot lobby, waving the historical bonds in the air like a madman desperately trying to cling to the last remnants of a collapsed power. Marcus steadfastly believed that protecting the elite order was a divine mission that could not be violated, and his perfect defense system could not possibly be breached by a woman who only knew how to hold a mop. He would never admit a mistake. Despite Nathaniel trying to advise his client to calmly accept the undeniable legal reality, Marcus still aggressively ordered Security Director Richard Hayes to immediately draw his gun to protect the bank's assets. However, Richard merely stood perfectly still with his face staring the $500 Italian marble floor, fully aware that any violence at accents in prison would lead straight to an unpardonable life sentence in prison. The millionaire clients who had once laughed at Denise now hastily retreated behind the revolving glass doors, terrified by the miserable downfall of a dictatorial king, losing his mind because he couldn't accept being defeated by an invisible nobody. The kingdom of illusions had shattered. CEO Marcus Vance dropped to both knees on the pristine white marble floor of the lobby at exactly 9:18 a.m., his trembling hands clawing at the empty air as if trying to salvage the last bit of illusory power that had just slipped from his grasp. He frantically screamed vicious curses directed at the media and competitors on Wall Street, staunchly blaming a meticulously orchestrated, dirty political conspiracy aimed at overthrowing his family's financial empire. He utterly refused to acknowledge the rotten thieving crime his father had committed 30 years ago, stubbornly believing that he was the sole savior capable of maintaining the elite order. He would never admit a mistake. Chief Counsel Nathaniel Blackwood had no choice but to coldly signal 2 legal assistants to step forward and confiscate the gold-inlaid access card and the 40,500 high-security smartphone of the former executive to prevent any asset dispersion. Offshore bank accounts in the Cayman Islands worth over $148,000 under Marcus's name were instantly and automatically frozen through an encrypted emergency override from Sterling Vanguard's internal legal system. The impenetrable wall of power he had used to isolate and trample on voiceless laborers was now crashing down, burying him in a shameful disgrace. Everything was over. Security Director Richard Hayes slowly stepped forward with a completely different posture compared to his usual aggressive demeanor, carefully detaching the sparking stun baton and hooking it onto his belt in full submission. The guards, who had once chimed in with the elite's arrogance, now simultaneously bowed deeply, forming a 6-foot-wide honor guard aisle around the 52-year-old woman, wearing the denim jacket frayed at the elbows. They did not act out of fear of the massive fortune Denise had just reclaimed, but out of a profound respect surging from the bottom of their hearts for a laborer who had used extraordinary endurance to defeat a tyrant. Dignity reigned supreme. Completely ignoring the crazed screams of Marcus being escorted toward the gloomy service elevator reserved for staff, Denise leisurely buttoned her jacket and gently stroked the rough surface of the original ledger. She turned to look at the chief counsel standing, with his head bowed awaiting orders. Politely requesting he prepare the executive transfer documents for her to sign at exactly 2:30 p.m. tomorrow at the Central Legal Office. The colossal fortune of $64,312,000 did nothing to alter the tranquil expression on the black woman's weathered face, because her mind right now was solely focused on her 62-year-old brother Terrell, who was anxiously waiting for her at Oakwood Hospital. Family is everything. The impoverished janitor, once viewed as an invisible ghost, gently adjusted the strap of the olive-green canvas bag on her left shoulder, taking firm strides across the magnificent lobby that was now submerged in a sacred silence, so deep you could hear a heartbeat. The receptionist Vanessa stood cowering behind the marble counter, her face pale with utmost shame, not daring to look up at the woman to whom just 15 minutes ago she had hurled the most vicious insults. Denise walked through the crystal glass revolving doors to merge into the rushing crowd on Montgomery Avenue, bathed in blinding sunlight, carrying the absolute peace of a soul that had cleanly washed away the injustices of 3 decades. The truth always wins,